Hello and welcome to another episode of Marty's Matchbox Makeovers. Now I'm sure if you're a regular viewer you will know that I have been absent for almost a year. Well, this is because I have moved house, I have retired, and I've moved from Melbourne into the country, and it has been overwhelming with the amount of work that has had to be done. I had to put my hobby to one side for nearly 12 months, as I said, just due to the fact of there was higher priorities that I had to deal with. And so today I am starting my return to the Matchbox makeover world by attempting to make over this number 7A horse-drawn milk float, which came out in 1954, which is incredibly old by my standards. It's one of the earlier ones. Remember, the first Matchbox model was the 1A road roller, and that came out in 1953. Well, this thing, the horse-drawn milk float number 7A, came out the following year. And there was only 4 models produced that year. 4 different variants. So this is particularly old and is iconic of the original Matchbox models. They came out in various variations. Sometimes the crates were silver and so was the driver. I have seen a couple of pictures of the driver, who is generally white, and sometimes he has a brown hat. The axles were originally crimped, which this model is, and later they came out with rounded axles. If you have the variation with the silver crates and the driver, well, they are very rare and could be worth quite a bit of coin if they're in good condition. So as you can see, my model is pretty grubby. It's got a lot of chips on it. But not only that, it's got the drawbar and the horses. Not only that, it's got the drawbar and horse missing. So I'm having a close look at it now, and I don't know where this has been over the last 50 years or so, but it's covered in dust and like fibres. Here underneath you can see it's made in England by Lesney, but there's no actual number like 7A stamped on it. In between the milk crates up the top there, it's very furry and needs a good clean, and around the driver there, that just looks gross. So I'm looking forward to giving this a bit of a clean and paint strip it, take the wheels off and fix it up. Now I need some clues as to what this should look like ultimately. So using this Matchbox encyclopedia, I have a picture here as reference, and it looks pretty cool. So I need a drawbar and a horse, and everything needs to be spruced up and repainted. I also have a copy of the Roger Darkin's internet downloadable Matchbox catalogue, and it shows you all the different variants of this type of model. This particular model here, if you had the silver driver and the silver crates, you can see they sold for a lot of money. Generally speaking, they are orange body with the white crates and the white driver. So here's some parts that I've finally received through the mail, which I ordered some weeks ago over the internet from recovertoy.com. This first piece is a reproduction horse, and I must say I'm very impressed with the quality of it. It looks very, very original, and it's clean. There's no flashing on it or anything. The second part here is the drawbar. I must admit they do seem very fragile, and I'm treating them with care because they're quite thin metal, and I'm sure it's not like steel or iron. It's some kind of alloy that's easy to cast. So I'm going to have to, this is the only one I've got. So I have to treat it with some care, because if I break it, all could be lost. See, it's got an unusual little kink in it there, and I think that's trying to mimic the originals. And as you can see, I've done a test fit. I've just propped everything up there, and you can see why the kink's there, because the attachment point on the horse is slightly higher than the level of the carriage. Anyway, I'm going to paint strip this model now, but first up, I have to take these wheels off. Just a point of note there that these axles are crimped on one end and they have a mushroom head on the other. So I'm just going to cut those off, and hopefully I've got some in my spares box. If not, I'm going to have to recreate some. So with some side cutters, I just cut straight through the axle to get these wheels off, which incidentally are metal, and they're silver grey painted. But very solid, and a great piece of detail there on those wheels. You can see the tread on the tyre and the spokes, all very clearly defined. So incredibly small, as you can see from the size of my thumbs. So I'm just showing you both ends of the axle. One is domed, mushroom headed as I said, and the other one's flattened by some kind of mechanical method. And this was in all the early models, they had those flattened ends on the axle. As they progressed, they got a cleaner finish by having a mushroom head on both ends. Now I've got to find my paint stripper. It's up here on the shelf somewhere. There it is. This is a tried and tested product that I've used many times in the past. So I apply it in a disposable plastic bowl with a disposable brush, and I generally hold these models with these hemostats, which are self-locking pliers used in surgery and such like. The axle points look a little bit weak, so I'm reluctant to risk snapping one of those off. So I'm holding this model by the tray behind the driver there, the mid tray. So this is Poly Stripper Paint Stripper, and it's quite caustic. I have got it on my hands in the past and it stings a little bit. So that's something you've got to be mindful of. Ordinarily, I would be promoting the wearing of gloves, but I don't have any today. So if you're trying this at home, I should say don't try this at home. But if you are, wear some gloves. Now I spread a liberal amount of this paint stripper all over the model. And as I said, ordinarily, this is a fantastic product and it suits my needs 90% of the time. However, these older models seem to have a different type of paint. Maybe it's got a heavier lead content, I don't know. But here's a time lapse that ran for 10 minutes. And normally you see all the paint bubbling off and curling up and basically shredding the model. But today it didn't happen. And I tried to agitate some of the paint off using the brush and some of the dried up paint stripper residue in the tub there. I have some success, but nowhere near enough to consider this ready for priming and repainting. So despite my best efforts with this disposable brush that was donated by one of my subscribers, I have to resort to an old favourite, the pink toothbrush, the bristles of which are slightly thicker and sturdier than the disposable brush. And hopefully I shall have a little bit more luck. And I did. More of the paint came off and it was quicker and easier to do. But once again, it was not 100% coverage being removed. So I had to redo it in some fresh paint stripper, and I thought I'd use the fume effect where I covered it with a separate cup so the fumes would accumulate and wouldn't evaporate into the room and would affect the paint more efficiently. It seemed to work. The paint came off a little bit better the second time round, although this model, it's an extremely complicated casting with a lot of right angles and paint traps. That's what I call those right angled joins. And here around the hat of the driver there and the face of the driver, the paint just clung on for dear life. And I spent at least 30 minutes, maybe more, with these dental picks and pins and tiny little knives to try and get as much of this old orange paint off as I possibly could. And it was extremely time consuming and yet somehow satisfying when you see a little bit of that orange paint peel off. So I'm going to try and attach the drawbar to this model. I was going to glue it on, but I thought that was a little bit naff and a bit of a cheat using some glue. So I thought I'd have a go at welding it on with this Muggy Weld product, which is a low temperature alloy. You use it with this flux, which has the consistency of warm honey. Here's a piece that I practiced on. It seems very solid. One side looks like rubbish, the other side looks like good. So it's a It's been over a year since I've used this product, so I am a bit rusty. That's why I did a practice run. To melt the product, I use this little butane gas torch. So before I start, I set up the two items together here using some helping hands and some self-gripping pliers. Now the thing about the muggy weld is it only runs to where apparently it only runs to where the flux is. So I made sure I made a sandwich of metal, flux and metal. And I'm heating it up and I'm hoping that the metal will run between the gap and make a really good join. Now in the past I remember you've got to keep heating it till the flux goes brown and then it's ready to accept the melted metal. I've never been really very good at this, so I'm winging it here. And again, it's a learning process. This whole hobby is just every day you're learning something new, different technique and that. And I'm just putting this on, and it's going solid. It's not really particularly running particularly well in the groove there. And as you can see here, it's gone solid and it looks rubbish. So this calls for some drastic remedial action. I'm using my rechargeable Ryobi Dremel that sits on my workbench there, and a couple of specialist tools. One's a ball grinder, the other one's a cylindrical grinder. And I'm hoping and praying that I can make this big blob of muggy weld go away, because I could not show this to anyone in my display cabinet and feel any joy, which is what this hobby is about. It's about restoring old things and making them look new, and it gives me pleasure. Today, I must admit, I was not very happy with the results. Despite my best efforts, the M on the Made in England by Lesney has been partially concealed. And after hours of grinding and hand filing, and then finally the application of a small amount of body filler, it's the best I could get it. I'm just grateful it's on the bottom of the model and not on the top. So now it's time to clear up and move on to the next stage, which is the priming and painting. Which paint to use, I hear you ask. Well, here's some scraps of paint that I recovered from the paint stripped residue that was in the disposable tub, and I've stuck it to this piece of white card under some sellotape so I can compare the colours I have. Now this Vallejo paint number 27, it's orange red, and I must admit it's an extremely close match. It's also acrylic, and I have some acrylic thinners here, so I'm hoping to mix these two together and spray them through my spray gun and make this thing look great. So I just put a little blob on there and I smear it around just to thin out a bit. And you can see that the colours are almost identical. I think in the real world, Matchbox didn't really care about the colours because there's so many different variations, slightly redder, slightly oranger, etc. Before I paint it, I'm going to use my favourite product, the Tamiya Fine Grey Primer. So now I'm just setting up the spray booth to accept the model. My camera stand is in place, my light is on, and the fan, it's running. The extraction fan, except it's not extracting because the window behind it is closed. So I've just realised I'm stupid and I need to open the window. So I go outside to open the window. Now this building we're living in is over 100 years old, and I think this window is probably an original window because it's as sticky as anything, and I can't budge it. So I go back inside and see what I can do. It's a very stubborn window, been painted many times by the previous occupants. Anyway, I realised that it's actually got a latch on it and it's locked, so that's probably why I couldn't open it. And voila, hello. So now I've got air extraction, light, and a camera stand. So time to apply the, as I said before, the Tamiya Light Grey Primer. It's one of my favourite products. It obscures a lot of imperfections. and it makes the paint dry in a consistent shade. I'm using those hemostats, and today I've realised, working with this model, that those axle points are sturdier than I first thought, so I'm quite comfortable using those clamps on those axle points. I leave it in there to dry, and now I'm mixing up the paint, and I'm going for a 50-50 mix of the thinners and the paint. Now 50-50 normally means 50% thinners and 50% paint, but doing it by eye and now looking at it later on in the video, I think maybe I've gone like, it'd be like 30-70. Anyway, I mix it up with my little Badger electric mixer, which is a great little thing. If you haven't got one, get one. And they're great to watch in slow motion too. So that's the paint mixed. Now my spray gun has not been used for a year. And I cleaned it out, and I filmed cleaning it out and making it work, because it didn't work when I first used it. I thought I was filming it, but I forgot to press the record button. So I missed all that footage, and it was great footage. But you know what? The downside would have been that this video is 20 minutes longer than it is. And I'm sure you don't want to hang around to see the end results. For the horse, I'm using the Tamiya X Brown. It's a lovely gloss chocolate brown, similar to the images I've seen online of the horse colour. By the way, this model was bought for me by Julie, my wife. She found it at the Talbot market, which runs once a week in the state of Victoria. And when she asked how much the model was to the lady that was selling it, the lady said 50 cents. And Julie said, okay, I'll buy it. And then the lady said, well, I don't have any change, so I'll have to call it $1. So Julie said, okay. Anyway, Julie paid with it with two 50-cent pieces. Now, the woman could have given her one back and said, here, I'll stick with the original plan, but she didn't. So it cost us $1. After painting, I stick the model and the horse into my little baking oven there at around 50 degrees. Just to harden the paint and speed things up, otherwise you can't handle it because you'll leave fingerprints on it. I've got this grey wash. Again, this has been sealed up for a year and it's still good. So I'm happy with that. I've got the old polystyrene block here with the toothpicks in it. Standard piece of apparatus for these types of models. You just stick the wheels on there. Simple as. These wheels, by the way, have been cleaned in some thinners, so there's no fluff or dirt on them. I'm just sprucing them up a little bit with this light wash. And with the cocktail sticks, you can revolve them in your thumb and between your thumb and I can't say thumb. I'm saying thumber. Between your finger and thumb. There you go. And it aids with even coverage. Now, one of them has got some blobs in the spokes, I notice. So I just picked it up and like puffed on it with a, a bit of a blow there to blow the gaps out, and it became good. Now I'm looking at these axles because I'm thinking now of putting these wheels back on. Luckily I have a tray of axles from other models that I've destroyed, and I found one, a perfect match, except it's not long enough. So I got excited momentarily. It's the same diameter, same kind of steel, and no good. So I put that one away, and I have to resort to another tried and tested method, which is using axle rivets. Now, axle rivets here, as you can see, I bought a packet of, 25? I've used a few of them, and they are the exact same diameter as the original axles, which is great. And all you need to do is cut them to length. Well, you remove this collar first because it's a pop rivet. You've got that collar on there and you don't need that. So you remove the collar, you cut them to length, and then you flatten the end. In this case, the ends are flattened, otherwise I'd have to reform them into a mushroom shape. So I won't have to do that today, which is great. Now the model is out of the oven and the main colour is dry and hard. I just have to touch in all the highlights here with the white paint and white gloss paint. So I basically flood the area of the milk bottles here with a dilute solution of the white Tamiya paint. I think it might be X1, is it? I'm not sure. And I paint the driver. I also have to touch up some of the orange afterwards. The pasteurised milk sign here, I thought, how am I going to paint that and not make a mess? So I got these punches. I got a small one, and I had some self-adhesive feet for the underside of ornaments and that kind of thing. And I punched out a little tiny circle and stuck it on the end of this, like, I don't know, Allen key drill bit thing. The idea was I'd dab it in the paint and just like brush it on there very gently and just highlight the highlights in white. Now, here's the initial shot. Doesn't look that good. There's little bits of fibre on there clinging on. You don't see it with the naked eye, only under this magnification. So I addressed that with some tiny little tweezers and redid it a couple of times and then touched it up with some orange paint. And then when I was happy, I thought, okay, time to put the wheels on. So here I am removing the collar off of those rivets. Very simple thing to do. And these are some self-locking pliers, or somebody calls them vice grips, mole grips. They come under different names. And what I've done is I've ground the teeth off of the tips so that when I use them and crush the end of the axle, it's flattened to try and resemble this original. And there's no sort of grooves in it. You have to put an intense amount of pressure on these pliers to get them to lock shut. But it actually does the job. So I cut them to length and I actually heat them up till they are red hot using my little gas torch, and then I poke them through the wheel and crush them, because after they're heated up the metal is a little bit softer than it was before. It takes an enormous amount of pressure to crush those flat, but it's well worth it. It's an easy fix, and it's kind of replicating the original Matchbox method of attaching the wheels. Here's a close-up. Look, oh god. Whoa. If you only could imagine how much pressure I've put on that. And then the only way to get these pliers undone is to use another set of pliers to break the geometric lock. And I try to hold on to the model so I don't chip it. Here's a picture of the flattened axles. Obviously they're too long. So I use my Dremel again with a flat grinding disc. And I just attempt to shape the flattened end into an original profile of an original flattened end. And they turn out pretty good. Remember, you're looking at this, I don't know, 20 times magnification, and it doesn't do it justice. They look really cool. So anyway, as usual, here's a reminder of what I started with. A furry... I mean, you wouldn't want to buy milk from this guy, would you, with all that fur and fungus growing in the back there. The term pasteurised milk was coined when these mobile units came into use, because the milk was often pasteurised before you could ask to buy it, because the things travelled so fast because they were horse-drawn. I'm sure you can understand where I'm coming from. It's a really poor dad joke. Anyway, here's the final finished product. Now remember again, it's 20, 30 times magnification. Who knows? Depends on the size of your plasma television or your computer monitor. And although it doesn't look perfect, none of the originals look perfect either. They all had imperfections because of the small nature of the toys and the difficulties, I guess, in the casting of the details. So overall, I'm very pleased with how this turned out. I painted white manes and hooves on the horse and the gold tackle, attaching it to the trailer. The axles look great. The little man sitting up there is a little bit boring. They could have put a bit more detail on him, but I chose not to because this is trying to replicate an original model, obviously. And here it is back in the 1950s, actually shown delivering milk to households in the south of England, which is where I was brung up. So I hope you've enjoyed the show. If you have, please like and subscribe and leave a comment. This is Marty from Marty's Matchbox Makeover saying goodbye. I'm trying to do it in a controlled manner. I'll try again.